School of Political Sciences of the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki is proud to host this international methodological workshop, as well as to be the host of the Populismus research team. And here I would also like to convey the greetings and welcome of our head of school and our dean who were unable to attend this meeting today. This whole initiative has been made possible due to the funding received within the framework of the operational program Education and Lifelong Learning, Action Aristia 2, which means that Populismus is co-funded by the European Union, the European Social Fund, and national funds. So our thanks go to our funding body, the General Secretariat for Research and Technology at the Department of Education, as well as to the Research Committee of our university, with whom we are together overseeing the implementation of this project. This event, the International Methodological Workshop entitled Analyzing Populist Discourse, Methods, Tools, Interpretations, concludes the first part of the project, which dealt with a survey of available literature and with methodological orientation. And all members of our team have been involved in the preparation of this workshop. Apart from myself as principal investigator, my colleague from the School of Political Sciences, Alexandros Kypkiolis, as researcher, Nikos Nikisyannis as postdoctoral researcher, Giorgos Katsambekis and Thomas Hiomos as doctoral researchers, and Ioanna Garefi providing technical support. I would like to thank all of them. However, nothing of that would have been possible without the Essex School of Discourse Analysis, which provides our core methodology in this particular project, and that means without its founding figures, Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe, to whom many thanks are also due. I'm very happy that Chantal will be joining us from tonight onwards, and our initial plans were to also have Ernesto here with us. He had accepted our invitation, but of course, as you may know, this was not meant to happen because Ernesto passed away last April. Apart from being my teacher, Ernesto was a valued friend who will be greatly missed. I feel that the least we can do is to dedicate this workshop to his memory. Last but not least, I would like to thank the rector of our university, Professor Yannis Milopoulos, who is here to officially open our proceedings. Professor Milopoulos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Stavrakakis. It is with great pleasure that I declare the opening of the international workshop Analyzing the Populist Reason, Methods, Tools, Interpretations, organized by a research team of the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. The fact that this workshop marks the beginning of a whole research program increases further its significance. The research program Populismus, Populist Discourse and Democracy, has undertaken the important research task to reassess the meaning of populism and to formulate a new and adequate theoretical approach related to the existing political environment. The aim of this research is precisely this, namely to update and to promote knowledge, to intervene in the current reality and to clarify complex phenomena which are subject to research by thousands of people. We are all witnesses in recent years of the return of populism in the public debate, both in our country and in Europe. At the same time, we are witnessing the inaccurate and sometimes intentionally incorrect use of the term populism. Therefore, it is with great interest that we will expect the results of both the workshop, which starts today, and the research program as a whole. The fact that the research teams of our university assert and undertake competitive research programs, financed also with European funds, demonstrates the potential and quality of the researchers of our university, but also the university as an outward-oriented institute. I am confident that the excellent organization of the workshop by the responsible team and the high level of guest speakers, both from Greece as well as abroad, will ensure the success of the workshop. I would like to welcome to Aristotle University of Thessaloniki all of you. Finally, I would like to congratulate the members of the research team of the Populismus project and to wish you all a successful workshop. If I may, to speak in Greek now, as I see that most of the participants are Greek, just to present you a small case study of populism, το οποίο έχω παρατηρήσει από την εμπειρία μου ως πρίτανης του Αριστοτέλειου Πανεπιστημίου Θεσσαλονίκη τα τελευταία 4 χρόνια και θα ήθελα τη συμβολή σας, αν αυτό είναι λαϊκισμός ή όχι. Όπως ξέρετε, η πολιτεία, η επίσημη πολιτεία, το Υπουργείο της Παιδείας, έχει κάνει ό,τι μπορεί τα τελευταία 4 χρόνια προκειμένου να απαξιώσει τη δημόσια εκπαίδευση. Έχει μειώσει τον προϋπολογισμό στο 1/3 από αυτό που είχαμε στο παρελθόν, με πρόφαση, με πρόσχημα την οικονομική κρίση, την πολιτική της λιτότητας, εξακολουθώντας όμως να μας αποδίδει το ίδιο έργο προς εκτέλεση ή και ακόμα μεγαλύτερο λόγω της αύξησης των φοιτητών. Έρχεται λοιπόν το Υπουργείο Παιδείας και εδώ είναι τώρα το θέμα που αν θέλετε μπορείτε να το σκεφτείτε και να μου πείτε και εμένα σαν ειδικοί επιστήμονες, εγώ δεν είμαι πολιτικός επιστήμονας, είμαι μόνο πολιτικός μηχανικός, έρχεται το Υπουργείο Παιδείας και με πρόσχημα την κοινωνική πολιτική έναντι των παιδιών που σπουδάζουν σε διαφορετικές πόλεις από τα σπίτια των γονιών τους, ορίζει ότι μπορούν να μετεγράφονται πολλαπλάσιοι φοιτητές από αυτούς που μετεγράφονταν στο παρελθόν, λέγοντας ότι κάνει κοινωνική πολιτική, πράγμα το οποίο σημαίνει ότι θα αποψηλώσει τα περιφερειακά πανεπιστήμια και θα βουλιάξει τα κεντρικά, δηλαδή το δικό μας, το Πανεπιστήμιο της Αθήνας και το Μετσόβιο ενδεχομένως, ας πούμε, αποψηλώνοντας το Αιγαίο, τη Θράκη, τα Ιωάννινα κτλ. Και λέει ότι αυτό γίνεται προκειμένου να ανακοφιστούν οι φοιτητές που έχουν οικονομικό πρόβλημα. Είναι λαϊκιστική πολιτική, είναι λαϊκισμός να κάνεις κοινωνική πολιτική σε βάρος της δημόσιας εκπαίδευσης ή είναι πράγματι μια αυθεντική κοινωνική πολιτική, κύριε Σταυρακάκη, αγαπητέ συνάδελφε? Έχω ένα ερώτημα το οποίο θα ήθελα πραγματικά απάντηση ή πολύ ευχαρίστως να το συζητήσουμε κάποια στιγμή. Η δική μου πρόταση, σας είπα ως πολιτικού μηχανικού και όχι ως πολιτικού επιστήμονα, ως πρίτανη του απειθήτα, εν πάση περιπτώσει, ήταν αν θέλετε πραγματικά να κάνετε κοινωνική πολιτική, επιδοτήστε τις οικογένειες των παιδιών που σπουδάζουν εκτός της πόλης τους. Δώστε στους φορολογικές ελαφρύνσεις, σε μια εποχή που η εφορία είναι δυσβάστακτη, βρείτε έμεσους τρόπους να επιδοτήσετε τις οικογένειες των παιδιών, ώστε να μείνουν στα περιφερειακά πανεπιστήμια. Αλλά μην καταστρέφετε και τα περιφερειακά αποψηλώνοντάς τα και κυρίως μην καταποντίζετε τα κεντρικά, εισάγοντας πολλαπλάσιους αριθμούς φοιτητών που δεν θα χωρούν ούτε πια στις αίθουσες. Πραγματικά να σας ευχαριστήσω και να σας συγχαρώ και περιμένω με αγωνία την απάντηση και σε αυτό το ερώτημα που έθεσα. Καλή επιτυχία.
Thank you very much. I think we can start with our first session, the opening session, which gives me the pleasure. It's one of these rare occasions in which one can chair his own paper without any other people present in the panel. So it's one of these rare occasions. This opening session is designed to provide an introduction not only to this workshop but also to the project that we are in which we are working, and in order to facilitate also your feedback throughout this workshop. Now, in preparation for the International Methodological Workshop organized within the framework of Populismus, our research team has drafted an internal technical report designed to chart the research trajectory to be followed in the project, to highlight the main research questions to be explored, and to put forward some guiding threads, main hypotheses, conceptual orientations, and so on and so forth. This report has been circulated to all participants in order to offer a starting point for debate in the workshop. This is because this workshop primarily aims at facilitating the exchange of good research practices and generating important feedback for the following stages of our project. Thus, a series of research questions and hypotheses first discussed here and enriched through our exchanges in the workshop will function as the springboard for the project's future activities, including research in several countries of Europe and the Americas, in Work Package 2 of the project, further theoretical elaboration, and the analysis of specific case studies in comparative perspective in Work Package 3, as well as a concluding international conference in 2015 and the launching of a web-based observatory of populist discourse. I have just offered very briefly an indication of the scope of the Populismus project. In the 18 months of its duration and up until its conclusion in July 2015, this research project will develop a complex bundle of activities aiming at the conceptual, analytical, and interpretative enhancement of our capacity to effectively research populist discourse and its relation to democracy. These activities will include a critical assessment of existing bibliography, the development of a rigorous but flexible theoretical and methodological orientation for the study of populist discourse based on the contribution of the Essex School of Discourse Analysis. This is where we stand at the moment. A series of research visits to facilitate better understanding of areas considered hotspots of populist mobilization, Venezuela and Argentina in Latin America, the US, France and the Netherlands or Austria, Spain and Greece in Europe. Then another activity within the scope of the project is the composition of a series of reports and scientific articles on various aspects of the phenomenon. In particular, themes will include extreme right-wing exclusionary populism in Europe, left-wing inclusionary populism in Latin America, the impact of populism on democracy, as well as the emergence of a populist, anti-populist cleavage or divide in times of crisis. A set of international scientific meetings as well, this workshop, a series of lectures, a concluding international conference in about a year from now. All these designed to facilitate the relevant research and disseminate research findings. And then, last but not least, the development of a web-based observatory on populist discourse in the form of an interactive internet platform. So that gives you an idea about the scope of the project in general. Such a rather broad scope is, of course, imposed by the range of our subject matter, by the phenomenon of populism itself. And here, of course, we have traditional populist mobilizations, historical populism. This is a poster from the populist ticket at the presidential elections in the United States in 1892. Considered one of the first important populist movements, and perhaps the only one that claimed the name populist for itself. And here you have, which is very relevant, one of the ideas we have is to see, to examine together these two, the current situation, the current crisis you see, and what was happening in the United States in the 1890s. And this cartoon, this populist cartoon, shows that there might be many similarities between the two periods. This is an anti-populist poster. Another historical populism, Russian populism, the Narodniks, and of course, Latin America, Argentina. Here you see elections in Argentina in 1946. Oops. And then, of course, we have contemporary populisms. In Argentina, again, once more, this is Nestor Kirchner. And, of course, we are all familiar with these forms, Chavismo in Venezuela, and so on and so forth. And also, more recently, the situation in the United States, which will also be part of the project, where, again, a situation very similar to Greece, for example. We have at the same time right-wing and left-wing populisms. Here you see the Tea Party. Again, the signifier, the people, is prominent in this discourse, very conservative. And on the other hand, Occupy, again, this reference to the people and this dichotomic schema, the 99%, the 1%, and so on and so forth. Another Occupy demonstration, highlighting this importance of the people in this particular movement. And of course, Europe itself has not been left untouched by this avalanche. We have this big debate within European political science about right-wing, extreme right-wing populism, and something we will be discussing a lot in this workshop. And you have different generations, of course, from the older generation to the younger generation. And as evidenced by the results of the 2014 European Parliament elections, this trend seems to be continuously strengthened. At the same time, the European picture is gradually diversified to the extent that populist hybrids, which diverge from the classical extreme right model, seem to emerge in a variety of contexts. For example, UKIP in Britain, as well as Grillo's five-star movement in Italy. Last but not least, within the context of the European crisis, left-wing populisms seem to emerge dynamically, especially in the south of Europe. Thus, the indignants in Spain and Greece, as well as the party mutations, have also been described in both the media and in the academic discussion as populist. Another important case here is the one of Front de Gauche in France. You see again the slogans which are used, Mélenchon, place to the people. Now, let me pass from the imaginary to the symbolic. From the pictures, there are no more pictures. That's all you're going to get. Let me pass to more serious business. One of the starting points of our project was that most existing analysis of populist movements and their political discourse often suffer from a certain lack of global awareness, conceptual sophistication, and methodological rigor, as they are conditioned by regional, national, and continental peculiarities, and in addition fail to bridge effectively the theory-analysis divide. They thus encounter difficulties in accounting for the current and largely unexpected resurgence of populist phenomena around the globe. To illuminate all these populist phenomena seems to be a pressing priority for contemporary social and political research. The Populismus project purports to initiate a comparative mapping of such diverse phenomena with a view to articulating a synthetic conception of populism, able to reorient the empirical analysis of populist and anti-populist discourses in the global environment of the 21st century, and to assess its effects on the quality of democracy. In order to achieve these goals, Populismus will utilize a series of innovations developed in the areas of political theory and discourse analysis over the 1 or 2 last decades. In particular, guided by the innovative analysis of political identifications elaborated by the so-called Essex School, the project will adopt a discursive methodology to inquire into the mobilization of symbolic resources and passionate investments for as well as against populism, in a bid to explain both fascination with the people and abhorrence towards the people. It is anticipated that by negotiating this way the theory-analysis divide, this framework can generate a comprehensive and rigorous conceptual apparatus able to operate productively on the empirical level of a global comparative research of public discourse. In addition to articulating a theoretically informed account of populism, able to map and assess a challenging and expanding body of empirical material, the Populismus project will evaluate the effects of the emerging discursive cleavage between populist and anti-populist tendencies on the quality of democracy in Europe and beyond, reorienting further research and enabling the formulation of policy recommendations. Given the central location of debates around populism in sociopolitical research and society at large, in Greece there is no newspaper article or program in television where populism does not really function as one of the central themes. Given this salience of this debate, it is anticipated that benefits on both levels could be far-reaching. Now, let me briefly present some of the issues discussed in our report in order to kick off our discussion in this workshop. First of all, the inquiry put forward within the framework of Populismus is firmly located within the field of representation in both its meanings. And certain historical contextualization of the debate on populism we have done within the project highlights this importance of representation, as well as the importance of the link between the people, the signifier the people, and populism. Representation here is, on the one hand, political, democratic representation, a means to influence decision-making on behalf of popular claims and demands, as well as symbolic discursive representation, a process of articulation through which such claims and demands are shaped, staged, invested, accepted, or rejected. Taking seriously into account the historical development of the language games around the people and populism, Populismus is bound to register the inherent link between them. Studying the second always involves studying populism always involves examining the ways in which the first, the people, becomes articulated and debated, recognized and idealized, opposed and demonized. Hence, to the extent that the representations of the people invariably involve the staging of an opposition, to the extent that they are triggered by social division, by the splitting of every political community into part and whole, the many and the few, and the dialectics of inclusion-exclusion it enacts, and to the extent that they result in the construction of two political and intellectual camps, one usually named or denounced as populist and the other as anti-populist, every study of populism proper must also be a study of anti-populism, an inquiry into the symbolic instability and the historical variability of this opposition. In addition, although anti-democratic articulations of popular demands and grievances cannot be a priori excluded, this opposition often points to the clash between antagonistic models of democracy. Participatory democracy on the one hand, and elitist democracy on the other. During certain periods, historical periods, this clash subsides and paradoxical agonistic articulations emerge, instituting a certain truce. This is the idea put forward by Chantal Mouffe in the democratic paradox. This is the democratic paradox. But the antagonism can always re-emerge, especially in times of crisis. The pejorative designation populist acquires increased importance within the language games, marking such periods of democracy in crisis. Populismus is designed on the basis of carefully addressing the aforementioned points. It purports to articulate an approach to populism registering the intrinsic signifying link between the people and populism, accounting for the irreducible instability representations of the people historically acquire, and for the antagonistic language games in which they are increasingly involved and inescapably involved. And yet, this challenge is not merely theoretical, conceptual, or historical. It is predominantly empirical and analytical. Obviously, this research is not taking place in a vacuum. So how has political science dealt with these issues up to now? What happens when we pass from history to theory and political analysis? What are the shortcomings one has to avoid or remedy, and the good analytical practices to be acknowledged and endorsed? Indeed, the passage from theory to empirical study complicates things even further, especially given the immense proliferation of populist phenomena in contemporary global politics. To be able to effectively account for such a globally pervasive, multi-layered and ambivalent phenomenon is an important analytical challenge, I think, if not duty, for political research today. Responding to this challenge, Populismus seeks to develop an innovative hermeneutics of populism able to document, organize, and interpret in a comprehensive and rigorous way this complex and expanding body of empirical material. This is precisely what existing approaches have largely failed to achieve. The lack of a sufficiently flexible yet rigorous theoretical and conceptual framework has resulted in the production of, in most cases, of isolated case studies employing diverse theoretical perspectives and methodologies, and thus forestalling the emergence of a more or less comprehensive mapping and interpretation of populist discourses and populist politics at a global level. Thus, the resulting fragmentation creates difficulties not only for the analysis of populism in a comparative perspective, but also at the conceptual level, to the extent that researchers often tend to elevate their limited, particular geographical focus to a universal criterion, thus leading to rather idiosyncratic and incompatible conceptualizations of populism. The most significant example of this problem is recent analysis of European populism. Indeed, there is no doubt that in today's Europe, the word populism usually refers to right-wing populism or the populist extreme right. In addition, in most cases, this association assumes a restrictive form. And of course, we are entitled, if not obliged, to deal with this phenomenon with extreme right-wing activism and politics, especially given its pan-European manifestation, with the European elections being the last and the most dramatic manifestation of this problem. The question is how exactly to conceptually and politically deal with this problem. In particular, is the category of populism the most suitable way? If, that is to say, what we are currently facing is the pan-European rise of a nationalist, xenophobic, exclusionary, and very often violent extreme right, is the concept of populism the proper analytical instrument through which this particular problem should be perceived, categorized, and debated? What are the implications of such a naming and the analytical risks involved in such a restriction, which is both conceptual, reducing populism to the extreme right, and geographical, examining the European situation in isolation from its global populist context? So our basic idea is that most analysis of European populism suffer from a certain Eurocentrism. What becomes evident is the need for a conceptual methodological framework able to avoid this risk. Such a framework should be capable of breaking the near-exclusive association between populism and the extreme right and registering, on a first level, the existence of both right-wing and left-wing variants of populist claims, demands, movements, and parties. On a second level, however, this framework should also be able to provide adequate criteria to distinguish populism from ideologies, discourse, and movements that, although they include reference to the people, these references are peripheral and incorporated into projects, political projects, that are predominantly nationalist, racist, authoritarian, and so on and so forth. Populismus aims at articulating such a research, such a flexible and rigorous research framework. Apart from these correctives, an analysis of populism determined to overcome the poverty of Eurocentrism should also be able to move beyond the fetish of the European case study and embrace a truly comparative methodology. In other words, it is time to take seriously into account the complexity and historical political variability of populism, as well as its exclusionary potential, a potential most visibly present in contemporary Latin American experience. This has already been, this process has started within political science. The recent work by Mood and Kaltwasser is indicative of this attempt to bring together Europe and Latin America. And the way this is read, this distinction between left-wing and right-wing populism is registered within the recent work by Mood and Kaltwasser is through this central distinction between inclusionary and exclusionary populisms. And I think this distinction may provide a valuable tool for the analytical framework necessary for the Populismus project, provided, of course, that it is disengaged from an essentialist anti-historical tendency that attaches each type of populism to a different continent. Because now we also have left-wing populism in Europe. So it doesn't really work to associate in a restrictive fashion one type with Latin America and the other with Europe. Following this direction, work package 2 of Populismus will involve a series of research activities pertaining to areas of interest around the world. Argentina and Venezuela in Latin America, the US and Europe, and so on and so forth. In work package 3 and 4, this material will undergo consistent waves of analysis based on a series of case studies. And the material collected will also be crucial in producing an electronically accessible index of populist phenomena and of the discursive uses of the people in political discourse around the globe in the form of an open access web-based observatory. This is part of our work package 4. Through all these activities, Populismus purports to facilitate a truly meaningful comparison between diverse populist phenomena as well as between distinct anti-populist reactions, and thus it stands to benefit from research conducted within the area of comparative politics, and that's why a part of this workshop focuses on the comparative dimension. Now, passing from analysis to theory, this is very important, of course, because in order to resolve all these difficulties that emerge simultaneously at the levels of symbolic and historical variability, antagonistic representation, and comparative applications, we need a rigorous theory of populism. We need criteria able to guide us. Which could these criteria be? And how can they be identified? These are questions that only a true theory of populism can answer. And how have theories of populism answered them up to now? Generally speaking, one can observe two movements within the relevant literature. We have one current, which is the normative, substantive current, if you want, in which theorists try to define what exactly populism is through some sort of content, either ideological or organizational, and so on and so forth. And then we have another current which follows a formal or structural approach, if you want. I don't want to say a lot of things about our theoretical framework. There is a lot in the technical report that we have circulated, and a lot will be uploaded in our website, in the observatory website, in the following period. Examples of the first strategy would probably be Paul Taggart's take on populism, and other more traditional approaches. But then slowly, as years go by and these normative, substantive approaches face difficulties, one can observe a slow passage to a reluctant embrace of a formal alternative. And this affects both people like Margaret Canavan, for example, who in her work in the 90s endorses a structural approach, and in fact refers to Ernesto Laclau and to the formal criteria he has put forward. The same seems to be happening with the recent work by Mood and Kaldwasser, and also this turn to the formal aspect, to language, to discourse, is also to be observed in historical accounts of populism. For example, perhaps the most important contemporary historian of American populism, Michael Kazin, is also pointing out that populism should be studied as a form of persuasion, as a political language, as an ideal type of language. And this is a historian who has nothing to do with discourse analysis or with this type of formal approach to the study of populism. Our theoretical starting point is that the Essex School provides the most advanced version of this formal type of method, which could be very, and has been in the past, very important in the study of populism, and that this formal approach has been continuously strengthened within Laclau's own work from the 70s up until 5-10 years ago, and needs to be further elaborated. And this further elaboration promises to help us enormously in our analytical predicament, which is this comparative analysis of all these different populist phenomena around the world. I want to leave some time for discussion, so I will also skip all the technical stuff about the Essex School. Our speakers have the internal report, and some of our students, most of them have followed my course on discourse analysis, so they really know about that, so there's no need for that. One thing I would like to mention is that we will also take very seriously into account an attempt which has been made by some colleagues working from an Essex School perspective to enrich this method with other approaches from corpus-based approaches, as well as other orientation within this field. And we are very seriously interested in exploring this avenue and see how we can effect some cross-fertilization, which might be useful for us both in terms of our discourse analysis of our empirical material, but also in terms of the work which will be done at the observatory. So we are thinking of a series of interactive tools that we might be able to put forward, and people who access the observatory will be able to use in analyzing a variety of populist discourses. Now, I want to say a couple of things about the way this approach, formal approach to discourse analysis, the Essex School, has been used in the analysis of populist discourse. And this is something that started with Laclau's work in the 70s, but it has culminated in his work on the populist reason in 2005, but also something that has been at the forefront of research at Essex. And we have here in the workshop many colleagues who have completed PhD theses with Ernesto and other teachers at Essex who will talk to us about that. And there is also a very big group in Latin America of colleagues from Essex who have ended up, Alejandro Groppo, Paola Biglieri, and Francisco Panizza at the London School of Economics, who have used this approach to analyze populist discourse. And we will, of course, use all these theoretical and analytical resources in our own work. Now, as you see here in the PowerPoint, I think what is very important here is to stress these two minimal criteria, minimal formal criteria that the Essex School puts forward in its analysis of populist discourse. One of them has to do with the structural position of the signifier, the people, whether this functions as the nodal point of a particular discourse or not, or whether it is located at the periphery of the discursive articulation under examination. And the second criterion is whether the discourse we are examining offers a predominantly antagonistic representation of society, dividing society and politics, the political field, into two main blocks along equivalential lines. This is the logic of equivalence that Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe formulate along the lines of Saussure's distinction between the syntagmatic and the paradigmatic axis of language. So a populist discourse would typically, along these lines, refer to the people would be the nodal point, the main political subject, and would present society as divided between the establishment, the power bloc on the one hand, and the underdog, the people, on the other. And this is the equivalential logic at work, the two camps, this division, in opposition to dominant political discourses, technocratic, for example, discourses, asserting the continuity of the social fabric and prioritizing non-antagonistic technocratic solutions. That would be the logic of difference. This formal emphasis is visible in Laclau's work already in the 70s, but is further enhanced in his more recent work. And this is something that could be very useful in our approach. Laclau himself highlights the importance of stressing this formal aspect in dealing with some of the problems we have seen up to now. In the first place, he says, this is a quote from Ernesto Laclau, we have a way, with this formal approach, we have a way of addressing the recurrent problem of dealing with the ubiquity of populism, the fact that it can emerge from different points of the socioeconomic structure. Secondly, he adds, we can grasp better in this way something which is essential for the understanding of the contemporary political scene, the circulation of the signifiers of radical protest between movements of entirely opposite political signs. So building on this challenging theorization of political identifications, elaborated by the so-called Essex School of Discourse Analysis, Populismus seeks to resolve the tensions found in existing approaches in a persuasive way. Now, I want to conclude with some of the implications of using this formal approach, some of the analytical implications that follow. And let me go back to the example I have used, which is this Eurocentric emphasis in most European analysis of populism, which associate restrictively populism with the extreme right. Obviously, this formal approach makes it much more easier to have this comparison between Latin America and Europe and also the US among different types of populism and so on and so forth. But it also provides the way to distinguish in a very clear way discourses which include reference to the people within discursive articulations which are not populist. And this is, I think, the case with the extreme right in Europe. Because if we study what is the nodal point of the extreme right? Is it the people? Is it the nation? Is it race? In most cases, these are racist, nationalist discourses in which the nation is the nodal point. It is not the people. The people is located in the periphery of the articulatory chain of these discourses. And that gives us a very important tool in order to introduce this distinction between populist and other discourses that, in fact, our hypothesis here would be that to the extent that they rely on a representation of the sociopolitical field divided between a national inside linked to the nation and a national outside linked to an enemy nation or to groups not belonging to the ethnic community, such as immigrants, exclusionary discourses, which are currently associated with the extreme right, should not be labeled and treated as populist. This hypothesis will be, of course, further elaborated and formulated within the framework of the project, and will be researched in the empirical aspect of our study. And that, of course, this importance of the structure, the particular architectonics, discursive architectonics, which are visible in a particular discourse, will also help us research the relation between the people, not only with the nation or with the race, but also with class, with the multitude, which is something very much in vogue in radical discourses today. Let me very briefly refer to a set of other implications of this project and areas that we would like to study. Another important area is to see what is the relationship between situations of crisis and populism, or the emergence of a populist, anti-populist divide. And here we believe that through Laclau's conceptualization of dislocation, the concept of dislocation, one can probably illuminate this aspect as well. Another important issue is to what extent this populist-anti-populist discursive divide can be associated with this more traditional concept from political science, the concept of cleavage, concept of cleavages. And there is a movement within cleavage theory to take on board this symbolic construction, discursive construction of cleavages, relationship with identity and so on and so forth. So that might be an area in which discourse theory and more mainstream approaches could enter into some kind of dialogue. Now, last but not least, we want also to explore the limits of formalism. We think that every vibrant theoretical and analytical project needs to be aware of its own limitations and needs to work very much on them. And some of the limits one can observe here, and limits that we are determined to research within the framework of the project, is at least these three that you can see in this slide. First of all, the danger of degreeism. That is to say, there's a certain ambivalence in Laclau's work during the last period, in which sometimes populism is presented as identical to politics. Real politics is a priori populist. The question he says that we should ask is not whether a movement is populist or not, but to what extent is a movement populist? So every political movement is supposed to be populist. The question is, it's a question of degree, in other words, question of degree. Thus, populism becomes identical with politics. I think that here Laclau puts in danger the operationality and usefulness of the concept of populism in political analysis. And in fact, this idea that there are degrees contradicts the stress on the architectonics of this. So if there are degrees, so what's the point in distinguishing between a nodal point and a moment, which stands at the periphery of a discourse? So, in other words, we think that there's a lot of work to be done here. The risk is to lose the conceptual particularity of populism as a tool for concrete comparative political analysis. And for all these reasons, Populismus opts for a formal structural conceptualization of populism on the one hand, but one that will be aware of the limits of formalism, degreeism, for example, and thus capable of mediating between the ontological level and the ontic level of the signifying reality of concrete political struggles, serving, that is to say, as an interface between theoretical analysis and the reality of political practices. A second area of contention is this area of affect, emotion, and discourse. And of course, we all know that within sociology and the social sciences, much of the 20th century signaled an exclusive emphasis on the cognitive, rational, and at best at the symbolic or linguistic aspects of social interaction. This emphasis took place at the expense of emotional, affective, and passionate aspects. This situation is changing gradually, is gradually changing. We have this passage from the linguistic turn to the affective turn within the last 10, 20, 25 years. And within this framework, a lot of criticism has been addressed towards the Essex school. There's this whole discussion about post-hegemony, for example, which to a certain extent accuses the Essex school of neglecting this aspect of affective investment, biopolitics, and so on and so forth. So the idea is that by stressing hegemony in representational terms, the Essex school does not take into account this aspect of affectivity and so on and so forth. Of course, that this criticism neglects this important shift within Ernesto Laclau's work in the last 10 years, which seems to be indicating an embrace of psychoanalytic theory, and especially the issue of affect, which is very much visible in his work on populism, for example, in Populist Reason, in his book on Populist Reason. And of course, it also neglects a very long the whole work that Chantal Mouffe has done already, I think, a few years after the publication of Hegemony Social Strategy, already in the late 80s, in the early 90s, definitely, Chantal starts working on the issue of affectivity, affect and the passions. So I think it is a little bit unfair to speak about the Essex School as an approach that neglects the passions, affectivity, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, there's a lot of work to be done here. There's work on populism, and Nikos Demergis, who will speak to us on Sunday, for example, has done very interesting work on particular affects like resentment. So there is a lot of work that can be done in further enriching this embrace of affectivity on behalf of the Essex School. And here, the Lacanian theorization might be important, especially since this issue of affective investment in populism also has to do with the way people relate to the leader. This is very much visible in Ernesto's work, and it is something that we want to elaborate further. Not the leader as a person, but the name of the leader, which reminds us of the name of the father in Lacanian theory. And also here another type of enrichment could emerge from articulating a new theory of charisma, because charisma is usually is very often involved in and used in analysis of populism. And here I think the theory of charisma put forward by James Scott, anthropologist, political anthropologist James Scott, might be very useful. And also the issue of verticality, horizontality is another aspect that will be researched. Last but not least, the implications for democracy. Populismus will focus on the crucial question put forward by many analysts of populism, by Mood and Kaltwasser, for example: should populism be considered a threat or a corrective to democracy? Or maybe both. And under which conditions? To the extent that this particular phrasing of the debate tends to imply, however, that democracy refers to only one particular institutional arrangement on which consensus exists, clearly a very simplified picture of a much more complex historical dialectic, Populismus will also explore the possibility that what is at stake here is the antagonism between different conceptions of democracy, participatory versus elitist conceptions of democracy. But even if one stays within the framework of a liberal democratic model, what does the dynamic return of the people reveal with regards to the state of democratic institutions in the 21st century? If popular sovereignty and representation have been the victims of the post-democratic, technocratic transformation of liberal democracy in an age of advanced globalization, is populism symptomatic of the need for a new type of democratization? And since the European construction is increasingly suffering from such a post-democratic malaise, this is what Habermas and Ulrich Beck point out today. Can a return to the people play any role in reversing this trend, as some political theorists like Etienne Balibar, for example, have recently argued? What are the risks involved here, and how can they be addressed by contemporary political theory and analysis? These are, very, very briefly, 40 minutes. Okay. Some of the themes, issues, research questions, and hypotheses associated with the Populismus project. We hope to be able to thoroughly discuss most of them with you during the course of this workshop. Almost all the participants and the topics of the presentation have been selected on the basis of assisting our effort in this project. I have to admit this not very altruistic motive. And we are indeed very grateful for your contribution in this project. Thank you very much.